There are people who say I'm sorry the way others breathe. Automatic, constant, essential to survival. And if you listen closely enough, you'll realize they're not apologizing for what they did. They're apologizing for existing. Picture this. A woman walks into a coffee shop. Someone bumps into her. She apologizes. A man receives criticism at work, not for a mistake, but for someone else's poor planning. He apologizes. A child spills water at dinner. Before the glass even stops rolling, the words are already out. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It happens in parking lots, in text messages that arrive at 2 a.m., in relationships where love should feel safe, but instead feels like walking on glass. Sorry for bothering you. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for needing something. Sorry for crying. Sorry for me. These aren't just words, they're confessions. Prayers whispered to an invisible judge who never stops watching. They're the language of people who learned long ago that their presence required permission, and that permission could be revoked at any moment. So they apologize, not because they're weak, but because once upon a time, saying sorry was the only thing that kept them safe. Let's go back to the place where it all began, the origin story no one talks about. Imagine a child, small hands, wide eyes, a heart that hasn't learned to protect itself yet. This child exists in a home where love is conditional, not always cruel. Sometimes it's subtler than that. Sometimes it's just unpredictable. One day, laughter fills the rooms. The next, silence so thick you could drown in it. One day, they're praised for being curious. The next, they're scolded. Why are you always bothering me? Can't you see I'm busy? God, you're so needy. The child doesn't understand. How could they? Their brain is still forming. So they do what all children do when faced with chaos. They blame themselves. Because blaming yourself is easier than accepting that the people who are supposed to protect you might not always be safe. And so the apologies begin. I'm sorry for crying. I'm sorry for being too much. At first, the apologies work. The child learns that sorry is a magic word, not because it changes anything, but because it makes them invisible just long enough to survive. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, the nervous system stuck in overdrive. Bessel van der Kolk writes that trauma isn't just what happened to you, it's what happens inside you as a result. And for the child who learns to apologize for their existence, what happens inside is a fracturing, a quiet breaking. The self splits into two, the one who needs and the one who apologizes for needing. From the depths, they whisper the same question over and over. Am I allowed to be here? Now fast forward. The child grows. They become adults who flinch before they're even touched, who rehearse conversations in their head 100 times. They're the ones who, when someone asks, "Why do you apologize so much?" apologize for apologizing. Sorry, I know it's annoying. And here's the tragedy. To the outside world, they look kind, thoughtful. But inside, they're suffocating. Because kindness that comes from fear isn't kindness. It's survival. And survival, no matter how gentle it looks, is exhausting. Let me tell you what happens when you spend your life apologizing. You become a ghost. You learn to shrink, to fold yourself into shapes that don't hurt others. And one day, you realize something that breaks you. You've been saying sorry for so long, you can't remember what it feels like to believe you deserve to be here. There's a scene that plays out in therapy offices everywhere. A person sits across from their therapist and says, "I don't know who I am." And the therapist asks, "When was the last time you felt like you didn't need permission to exist?" The silence that follows isn't empty, it's full. And in that silence, something cracks. Not breaks, cracks. The kind of crack that lets light in. Because here's the thing about people who apologize for everything. They're not weak. They're some of the strongest people you'll ever meet. But strength built on fear is still a cage. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped apologizing? What would happen if I took up space? It's terrifying, actually, but necessary. So where does that leave us? If you're reading this, if you recognized yourself in these words, I need you to know something. You don't owe the world an apology for being human. Not for your needs, not for your emotions. Not for the space you take up simply by being alive. The voice in your head that tells you to shrink, that's not your voice. It's the echo of a child who did what they had to do to survive. And that child deserves your love, not your obedience. Healing starts with noticing. It starts with catching yourself mid-apology and asking, what am I actually sorry for? Sometimes you'll realize you're apologizing for being inconvenient, for having feelings. In those moments, pause, breathe, and let the apology die on your tongue. Not with anger, but with the quiet, revolutionary act of believing you deserve to be here. You do not have to be a fire for every mountain blocking you. You could be a water and soft river your way to freedom too. The world doesn't need your apologies. It needs your presence, your truth, your messy, imperfect, gloriously human self. So maybe start there, not with "I'm sorry," but with "I'm here." And let that be enough.